All right, everybody, in this video, we're gonna talk about bracketed real estate photography using available light. So I wanted to take a shot right here in the same exact spot that we did the single exposure tutorial, because we're gonna see a real difference here in the exact same conditions, taken just a few minutes apart, and you'll be able to see how different the results can be when you use bracketed shots. All right, so let's talk about setup on the camera real quick. Just looking at the back of the camera here, you see I'm still at aperture priority mode. I'm at f8 and ISO 100. I have bracketing mode turned on, so I can just press Q here when I'm selected here at the bracketed shots. And then I just scroll this wheel for my camera, and I can switch it from, +2, -2, or +1, -1, or +3, -3. And if I want to go into the settings as well, I can also select to see if it's a 3 exposure or 5 exposure technique. All right, so I always choose 3 exposure because I think 5 exposure, and sometimes people who do 7 exposure for bracketed shots, it's just overkill, and here's why. In my opinion, if you have to use 5 images, you're slowing your process way down just from uploading your images to your computer or uploading your images to an editor possibly, when you could just have 3 images. Also, usually when I do bracketed shots, I'm not selecting all of them. If I have 5 shots and using all 5 shots, I'm usually choosing maybe just 2. So 3 is plenty, especially if you're exposing them accurately. There's 3 really important steps to having fantastic bracketed real estate photography shots. The first step is to making sure the shots in camera are what they should be. So here's how you get it. I usually start with a +2, 0, -2 exposure compensation. So just taking a look at this shot, let's see how it goes. So just from the get-go in this situation, it exposes pretty well. What you want to look for when you're shooting this, and you can see the raw images in the back of your camera, starting with the 0 image, we can see that we have a pretty nice go-to. We can see the outside fairly well and some of the details on the interior, but the sky is looking pretty white, pretty blown out, so we're not getting that nice detail in the sky. And we're also seeing some loss of detail in the concrete and some of the white furniture that's out there. Once I move to the underexposed image, all of the detail in those bright parts of the image come in to look natural. This is the important part, because this is where lots of people mess up their bracketed shots. When you get that underexposed shot, you want to make sure that those highlighted spots in that last image are what you would like them to be when you finish the photo. So you don't want a blue sky that has a hint of blue to it. You want that very natural glowing blue that is there for the skies. And on the detail of, let's say, white furniture or concrete like we see out there, we want to be able to see the details of the spots on the concrete and that sort of thing. So just make sure that all of the detail is fully there, not kind of there. It needs to be exposed clearly. And for the bright exposure, usually this one's a lot easier to hit than the rest of them, because if you're hitting the low end, you're most likely going to hit the high end correctly. So we see a lot of the dark part of the images are now easily seen. You won't have to adjust that much, if at all, so you can avoid noisy adjustments in the shadows. So just look for that type of thing, and when you take these ingredients to post-production, it's going to be a lot easier to get the results you're looking for. In fact, let's just go ahead and compare these 2 images compared to the single exposure shot versus now. I had talked about how the single exposure shot was actually not too bad in this situation, because we had pretty even lighting outside the window and inside the window. So, it wasn't a horrible image. Lots of times, single exposure images, the window's just completely blown out. In that situation, it was all right. But look how much better the bracketed photo looks, even in this pretty good situation for single exposure. On the single exposure, we have lots of detail. It's not as colorful as it could be, and the details really are fuzzy and lost. It's not as sharp and bright. It doesn't pop out like properly bracketed shots can do if you're editing them correct. So anyway, even in a good situation, bracketing's still better. Now let's take a look at what it could look like where you really need bracketed shots, right down to the basement. All right, so we are back here in the basement of this house just to show off a little bit of the bracketing technique and how to do it right. So we're almost in the exact same position that we were just a few minutes ago with the single exposure. So let me just go ahead and shoot this real quick with the bracketed shot, so we can see that these images need some adjustment. So right now I'm shooting at -2, 0, +2 bracketed shots, and we can see that the underexposed image doesn't have, honestly, quite as much detail as I would like, because some of the highlights are still blown out. So what do you do in that case? Personally, I always like to erase those images so that I don't have repeats in post. And then I'm going to just roll this so that the exposure changes to a little bit wider. We're not gonna be at +2, -2 anymore. We're gonna be more like almost +3, -3. And I'm also going to roll this down so that the highest exposure is at +2 and the lowest exposure is below -3. Let's just go ahead and take a look at the back of the screen so you can see what this looks like. So the original exposure was right here at +2 and -2. In order to get those perfect exposures that we're looking for, I'm gonna go ahead and just roll these up to almost +3, -3, and then I'm going to slide them down. So you'll notice that it went wider. We're getting a wider range, and then I'm gonna roll it down so that the +2 is where it was. And the reason was because the bright exposure was just fine. It was the dark exposure that we needed a little bit more detail out of. So now that that's set, I'll go ahead and take this and let's take a look at the results. So just looking at these images, we have the even exposure or the first exposure, which is now a little bit below 0. And that still looks pretty good. We're getting some detail. The outside is definitely blown out. And then we have that -3 exposure of the window. And that's looking great. We have all the information we need out there. And then we have the bright exposure, which will give us all the detail we need on the inside. We can easily blend that in to a nice bracketed, completed image. All right, so that is basically the concepts for bracketed shots in real estate. You just will adjust it either up or down depending on where you need to get the shots. Like I said, I like to keep it with 3 exposures, and I'll show you how to edit these in post. If you do have any questions about this, feel free to use the search feature in the Facebook group. If you don't find what you need, feel free to tag me in your post and I'll answer as soon as I can. Thank you so much for watching, and always remember to learn, apply, and succeed.